China and management in China for over 20 years. She's most recently served as the country manager for Adidas, and she was the one who brokered the relationship of Adidas and Reebok in the new relationship. She has also worked as vice president for Liz Claiborne in China. She's served as the chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce. She works on the board of a number of nonprofits, and she's been in China for over 20 years. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Long.
So thank you for the introduction, Earl. Yes, I've been here since I was in kindergarten. No? You're not awake. So I thank Will and Hazel for the invitation. I have to say that when I was invited to speak at a design conference, I was a bit taken aback, as I come from the manufacturing side, the sourcing side, and usually we're at war with the designers. Does anyone actually design an apparel in this room? Anyone? Oh, that's why you don't get that joke. Oh, no, you do? Okay. So I was very fascinated by the topic and fascinated that manufacturing could have a voice in this, and that's why I agreed. Is this the big key or the little key? Oh, there we go. Apparel, as you probably know from those of you, if you wear clothes and read a book, is one of the oldest global businesses. I was always fascinated in the 90s when you'd start to hear the word globalization. I said, well, apparel's been doing this for a very long time. And silk from China going to Europe over the Silk Road was one of the oldest items, part of those camel tracks. So apparel has a place in this conversation in a very real way. So in order for us to look at this from a manufacturing point of view, it's a little bit micro. I have to warn you. Hazel and Will really set up some macro topics that I think are very valuable and good starting place. But my point of view is obviously in the micro, because that's, finally you have to get the fabric onto the cutting table and into a sewing machine and onto the container. So it's nice to have these big picture conversations, but it's got to get somewhere. China officially opened with the United States. They signed the diplomatic relations in 1979. And well before 1979, there was made in China. You just didn't realize made in China. But I use 1979 as sort of a rough, I say the 70s, because the Hong Kong traders started sourcing out of China long before anybody else, and they were making for the major brands. We just didn't know. So in the 70s, Hong Kong was a window to China. You couldn't come in here anyway directly, and the vendors were not open to you. You could not walk into a factory. None of us here would have been walking into factories. And the Hong Kong Trading Company worked with the foreign trading offices, the Shanghai Silk International Trading Corporation and the Shanghai Garments. These were the companies that controlled all apparel manufacturing. And that was what I call phase one. And then phase two came in when these foreign trading companies realized they had a problem. And the problem was that they didn't speak the same language with the buyers. And I'm not now speaking about English or French or German. I am speaking about quality, delivery, performing to expectations. This was the vocabulary that was missing. And the foreign trade representatives didn't know the first thing about making a garment. They only knew business. They only knew how to make a purchase order, but they didn't know if to go out and look at apparel and say, oh, that's what they ordered, that's what they're going to get. So there's some amazing disasters, and this is when I come in. I come in the 80s, and I started apparel, and I have great stories of pink zippers in a navy blue down jacket. And when I asked about that, why that was allowed, it was because those pink zippers were in inventory. So there was a mentality there that, you know, the Chinese vendors were coming from a very planned economy, not a consumer-focused economy, and so they were going to use the products and the components they had in stock rather than work towards the needs of the consumer themselves. And everything was imported. Fabrics, zippers, started, you know, with packaged, brought in for the final production. Sampling was all done with whatever they had, which is why we got the pink zipper in the blue jacket. But the final production, everything was imported. Labels, interlining, top thread, seaming threads, you name it, it was imported. So there'd be a container load of goods filled, brought in from, you know, Hong Kong, consolidated in Hong Kong and shipped in, or from Japan or Europe. And yes, we would buy silk from Europe. Does anyone think that's kind of funny? I thought it was hilariously funny at the time, but the issue was not the silk. The fabric was either woven in China or woven in Japan or Korea and shipped to Europe for dyeing. So the issue was the dyeing. The Chinese mills didn't understand consistent quality dyeing, and mostly it was because the equipment was so old. So in the 80s, began a major change in the way the Chinese vendors could start to really develop because they were working with the buyers directly. And in the 90s, you started hearing the phrase, China, the world's workshop. And it's because during this period of time in the 90s that huge changes were afoot in the Chinese factories. They were much more proactive. The mills were now developing. We stopped importing silk. We'd buy the silk from China and dye it in China with, you know, learning on both sides, learning language. Another development is the university system was now creating the workforce to staff foreign offices. Up to then, the majority of these offices were staffed by foreigners from Hong Kong, Taiwan, US. And as time goes on, this starts to go away and the Chinese come in because they're now being educated. And the materials, a lot of the zipper factories and the interlining companies, the hanger companies, the label companies, they start their own factories in China. So now all of these components are being made in China and one doesn't have to import them. And another major investment, major change is an investment made by the Chinese government. Because through this period, the domestic infrastructure does not support exports. And I am really taken by Will's numbers, because if you could go back to the slide on exports, think about how long it would take to import those containers of goods that I mentioned back in the 80s and early 90s. It could take you 2 weeks to get your container into China once it hit the port. But in the 90s, going into 2000, the Chinese government has now invested in roads, improving ports. They're using computers to upgrade all of their documentation flow. And when shipments arrive, you're actually getting phone calls to say, get your container out of here, rather than 10, 15 years before, where you would go in and beg to find your container. So goods can go in and out much easier, and the country is focused on efficiencies, and the vendors themselves are now understanding delivery and efficiencies. And as we go into the 21st century, doesn't that sound like a long time? 21st century. The sense of value added, not just cut and make, developing synergies between export manufacturing and domestic brands, domestic production is now coming into play. And not only in apparel, but every industry you can choose. You can choose small industrial goods, your blender, your hot pot, your car. Now this sense that China's not only for exports, but there is a dual model for manufacture, for domestic use. And now we're heading in, you know, where's the future going and what's the next phase? So I just want to encapsulate what I just explained into 2 slides. The Chinese vendor was very, very simple before. It was, give me a sample, I'll quote you a price. No sense of design at all. No sense of let me really look at it and let me understand what goes into making this garment. They were working for competitive price, the quality, and delivery. Because at the beginning, to be late 30 days was not a problem. And apparently the markets accepted it. In today's world, the vendor would be fined huge amounts of money. But back in the 80s, a vendor was shipped late, and it was a slap in the hand. Everyone understood. But the low price covered a lot of the hidden costs, covered a lot of the mistakes that were happening. So it took a long time to get these three items, these three components of a successful manufacturing company. As I spoke before, it moved into the efficiencies, and those three, price, quality, and delivery, became accepted. If you didn't have those, if the vendor couldn't prove they could deliver on those three components, they weren't even talked to anymore. They weren't part of the conversation. And instead, companies such as the Gap, the Liz Claibornes, these multi-brands, were looking at these multi-global brands, were looking at innovation. Had the factories invested in pattern-making equipment, automated and computerized pattern-making equipment so patterns could be sent by internet, because the internet is developing during this period, right? Before that, it was all express mail. Everything went by express mail. Speed to market. So when I joined in this industry in 1987, it would take 12 to 14 months from concept to leaving this country. Now we're down to anywhere from 3 months. It could be 2 months if the fabric is already in hand, but 3 months. That kind of speed to market. The shipping agencies joined in. APL, Maersk. We're talking about them. They also got in the game of reducing lead times. So the whole lead time became much reduced because everybody in the supply chain was working for efficiencies. And it's all part of this cost pressure. When we talk about the word efficiencies, that's a euphemism for reducing costs. And the manufacturer became almost a game to see how low the prices could go. And it seemed as though in the 70s, where the vendor came in with a $15 t-shirt because it was 50% of what they got in the US, that sounded great. Now, $3, $4 for a t-shirt. Because pressure, more efficient, prices become lower. So we're talking about, the export industries, export market in this situation. And as we look at the domestic market, we're going to turn to the word called profitability. And profitability is the one piece that Will does not cover in his presentation. He talks about exports, volume, numbers, but how profitable were the Chinese exports? And I'm going to argue that at the beginning they were much more profitable than they are today. You can ship 10,000 units of something where you're making 50% profit, or 10,000 units where you're making 5. There's a huge difference. So volume has had to make up for the manufacturers reducing their profitability. Through that time, and this is a mindset that Chinese vendors had, they were customer is king. They would always tell me what you want. Tell me what you want, we'll do it. Well, that sounds great, honestly. In the old model where you're trying to get better price, better quality, and better delivery, you really want people to be listening to you and responding and improving. The problem in this is it's totally external motivations. The vendors see themselves, and they're being taught that the customer is king, and they will tell me that. They would have said that to me. And I started to get irritated by this phrase because all it meant was they were waiting for me as the king to tell them what to do. But they were now traveling on their own. The foreign brands were now coming to China. There was still a lack of personal motivation to meet us at the pass, you might say, of what the market was really requiring of them. And that became and is my motto today when I talk to vendors, is I want to know, what are you going to do differently next year to help us cooperate and collaborate to a better place for our products, our brand, and your factory. And when we first started speaking to factories that way, they would look at us blankly because the mentality was very much a response mentality. And that's where we're going today. And I think the vendors need to understand the smile value curve. This is something that's quite old, 1992. It was created by the Acer CEO, Mr. Shi, out of Taiwan. I'm not sure if you know how the people like to talk about IT industry and how sexy it is. It's sexy if you get to design these little laptops and little iPods. But when you get into manufacturing of IT, it is no different and actually worse than the apparel industry. It is tough. It is price pressure. It is volume driven. And what he discovered way back in 1992, because they were all OEM, they were not brands. Samsung, LG, Lucky Gold Star in Korea, Acer in Taiwan, these are just OEM manufacturers. Same as cut and make, although I'm not sure that you cut. How you cut IT chips and and putting together, buy the components and put together a computer, but it wasn't their brand. And he's the one that did the calculation in the IT industry that said that manufacturing phase of the entire chain, the proposition of the product chain, was the lowest profitable part of the product chain. And what's fascinating is recently in the Chinese press, this is coming back. It was just in the paper last night, or in the last 5 days, Xinmin Wanbao had this story. So the market value or the cost or the profitability is the axis on, the vertical axis, and the horizontal axis are the steps in the process of making a product. So starting at the far left, you're looking at brand and brand development. And that's a high profit. If you own the brand, you're going to make the money. Show me the money. Well, that's where you're going to start making the money because you own the brand and have the rights to bring it to the market. And on the other end, far right, as you head out of manufacturing, is distribution, warehousing, sales. And that's another high profitable part of the product life cycle. So the Chinese vendors have specialized in the manufacturing, and over time, their part of the profit has reduced dramatically. So in the strong manufacturers, I assume, want to survive, and if they want to survive, they're the ones that are going to have to grow and change their thinking from profit or volume. And the factories that make for a Walmart, they're going for volume. Very, very, very low profit. Factories that make small runs, I know a factory in Jiangsu province, Chengfeng, they decided long ago, they were a manufacturer at Liz Claiborne, and they made a gamble that they would move away from gap orders, 300,000 unit gap orders. I mean, if you're a factory manager, to get a 300,000 unit order should make you very happy. What they found is 300,000 unit order, if it was selling well, Gap would come back with another 300,000 unit order. And suddenly their factories, which were very well organized and well structured in production, had to absorb a very large order, and it would almost close them down and cause them to go bankrupt because you couldn't fit in that order into your production plan. And they actually found they would lose money with these big orders. And over time, they changed, and they came back to us at Liz Claiborne, and even when I was at Adidas, and say, give us your smallest businesses, your most complicated product, high value, where we have to bring in foreign designers and foreign technical designers to help us make this product. And we want that business because they could charge us for now the value add on these much smaller orders. And now this huge factory, which has three centers, yeah, one factory does do those large orders because it keeps cash flow going. But the rest of the company is all small. So they figured out the profit was more important than volume. Most factories don't understand that yet. So if they want to do that, they can either invest in the left side of that circle or the curve, or they invest to the right. And it's probably easier for them to invest back upstream, where they add in pattern making and design, technical design, and fabric and trims development, and they really invest with component factories and then back up owning brands or collaborating on brands. The next question that I was thinking about, domestic or global, as we all know from Will's presentation, the export market has crashed. And have you heard the term the new normal? What is the new normal? Will the export markets, will the demand globally ever go back to that level? And the expectation is no. That Americans are starting to save money, and the Europeans, which were heading into that higher consumer mentality, have also retracted. Money is going to be spent on other things besides owning one more shirt, one more bag. So the Chinese vendors are going to be forced to survive, to turn their efforts into the Chinese domestic market. And they could do that by partnering with brands, going to brands that are out there. Yes, we know about a couple that are going to be spoken. You're going to meet their designers in a few moments, and I hope you'll ask questions about how they produce. I met the owner of Ete. Ete is a woman who's been running her business for over 10 years. She's from Heilongjiang province, but she has very successful, and she's started manufacturing with her own factories and now has moved away from that, but she collaborates. So this whole sense of manufacturing, working with a brand in China is here. And if you look at Li Ning is a big athletic wear factory, company. They've, I don't know if Li Ning was a gymnastics multi-star gold medal winner many years ago for the Chinese team in 1980 in LA, I believe. And he started his own athletic wear company to compete with Adidas and Nike. Adidas and Nike are two brands that have been active in the Chinese. They're international brands, obviously, but they've been active in China for over 15 years, long before any other foreign brands were here. Now you can see H&M, Zara, and then, of course, Max Mara and all those international, you know, what I call five-star brands. Zara and H&M they're new. They're very new on the market. We can all remember when they weren't here. But Adidas and Nike have been manufacturing for the Chinese market. But if you look at the smile curve, they own every part of the curve except manufacturing. So they make the profitability for the China business is still in their hands, and they're a good role model for the Chinese vendors. Hempel is a factory that I worked with for many years, a beautiful factory, manufacturing for export, that by 2000 had bought into or developed two of their own brands in the China market, and you will see their shops around town. These are good models. So what holds the Chinese vendors back, and this is where I'd love to talk to people, and I'd love to hear what our designers are going to say, but finding the creative talent to support this effort to go up the brand curve or up the profitability curve is not easy. And that's why it's very exciting to see a design conference in Shanghai. A lot of people have an idea of what design is, but taking design from a conceptual point of view and turning into a commercial entity is a very big leap that a lot of, there's just not enough talent. Sophisticated management teams that understand the entire profit chain and understanding their markets, whether they're Chinese markets or international, and then having the confidence to perform in those markets. A lot of Chinese manufacturers who I speak to are afraid to take the risk and move out into something new from what they know. So I personally believe that there's a silver lining in this crisis that we're facing, and I believe the shakeout from the Chinese market it'll be only for the positive. A lot of the small mom and pops, the low profit, low quality firms will dissolve and disappear, and the strongest competitors will survive, and the market will speak to that. So on that note, I will pass it back to Earl.